The woman in the cream Range Rover told the crew to clear my late wife's meadow like she was ordering weeds pulled from a sidewalk. The mower chewed through 2 hives before I could cross the pasture, and the honey ran into the dirt like somebody had opened a vein. I did not yell, because the map she was waving on her tablet had my forged signature on it, and I knew right then she had just handed me the rope. My name is Caleb Mercer, and for almost 30 years I made my living walking property lines in eastern Wyoming, usually with mud on my boots, sunburn on my neck, and somebody mad at me because dirt has a funny way of making people greedy. I retired 2 winters ago, not because I was tired of the work, but because my wife, Ruth, had gotten sick again. And when a woman has spent 41 years making your coffee too strong and pretending she does not know you sneak pie after supper, you do not let her sit through chemo alone. We lived on 73 acres outside a little town called Briarfork, a place most people only notice when their gas tank gets low, with a red barn that leaned a little east, a windmill that complained all night, and a strip of sweet plover. Ruth planted herself behind the south pasture because she said the bees deserved something pretty after putting up with me. Ruth passed in October, right when the cottonwoods were going gold, and after that the place got quiet in a way I still do not have the right words for. The kind of quiet where the refrigerator sounds rude, or a dog sighing in the next room can make you look up like somebody called your name. I had Buck, my old yellow lab, and I had the land, and I had those bees, which Ruth used to call my tiny, angry employees. That was enough most days, or at least I told myself it was. Then, Juniper Hills Reserve started acting like my pasture was part of their front lawn. Juniper Hills was one of those fancy developments that showed up after some Denver money discovered our sunsets. 200 houses with stone mailboxes, fake ponds, and an entrance sign big enough to make you think royalty lived there instead of people who got mad if a trash can stayed out past noon. I knew that subdivision better than their own board did, because I had surveyed the original boundary back when it was still winter wheat and antelope tracks. I set the pins. I signed the plat. I knew, as surely as I knew the scar on my left thumb, that not 1 inch of Mercer land belonged to them. Their HOA president was Marla Kincaid, and I will say this, for Marla, she had the confidence of a woman who had never once had to change her own tire. She wore white jeans to construction sites, spoke to grown men like substitute teachers, and had this little smile that never reached her eyes, the kind of smile people use when they are about to charge you a fee. Her husband, Preston, sat on the county land use board, which made her feel like she had a sheriff's badge tucked in her purse. And for years I let her be because she stayed on her side of the fence, and I stayed on mine. Then, one Monday in March, I opened my mailbox and found a certified notice saying my property was in violation of Juniper Hills aesthetic standards. My pasture was overgrown, my hives were a nuisance, my barn was an eyesore, and if I did not bring everything into compliance within 30 days, I could be fined $500 a day. I read it twice at the kitchen table while Buck watched me with that worried dog face they get when humans start laughing at paper. The letter included an updated community boundary map, and right there, colored in pale blue, was 41 acres of my south field, Ruth's clover patch, the bee yard, and half the old irrigation ditch my grandfather dug with a team of horses. I called my attorney, a dry old fox named Leonard Pike, and when I told him what had happened, he went quiet for a second, then said, "Caleb, save the envelope, save the letter, and whatever you do, do not educate stupid people for free." That was Leonard's way of saying, let them make the next mistake. They did. 2 mornings later, at 7:12, I heard engines grinding up the service lane behind the pasture, and Buck went off like the devil owed him money. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee still in my hand and saw a pickup, a flatbed trailer, and a skid loader with a brush cutter on the front. Bright orange, mean-looking, the kind of machine that does not care whether it is eating weeds or somebody's memories. 4 men in grey shirts were unloading stakes, and Marla Kincaid stood beside her Range Rover with sunglasses on, holding a tablet against her chest like Moses coming down with commandments. I walked toward them slow, because old surveyors do not run unless fire is involved, and even then we like to confirm wind direction first. The foreman, a square kid with a beard that had not made up its mind, looked nervous when he saw me. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "we have a work order from the Juniper Hills Board to clear non-compliant vegetation inside the community boundary." I said, "Son, unless your work order came with a deed from God, You are standing on my land. Marla stepped forward before he could answer, smiling that polished little smile. Caleb, she said, and I hated how she used my first name like we had shared a church pew. This has been reviewed at the county level. The boundary was corrected last month. You can dispute it through the proper channels after remediation is complete. Remediation. That was the word she used for my wife's clover. The skid loader started before I reached the bee yard. The first hive split open under the cutter with a sound I still hear sometimes when the house is too quiet. Wood cracking, frames snapping, bees rising in a black-gold cloud, honey spilling onto the dirt in thick, shining ropes. The crew scattered, slapping at their necks, and Buck barked so hard he nearly choked himself. Marla took 2 steps back, but she did not tell them to stop. She only snapped, "Keep moving. We are already behind schedule." I looked at her tablet. I saw the blue-shaded boundary. I saw a signature box in the corner with my name, Caleb Mercer, licensed surveyor, and below it a license number that was close enough to fool somebody at a glance, but wrong enough to make my stomach turn cold. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Marla tilted her chin. "Are you threatening me?" she asked. "No, Mom," I said. "I am preserving you." She blinked at that, just once. Then she told the operator to keep cutting. By the time they left, 2 hives were gone. The edge of Ruth's clover was shredded, and there was honey on the grass, on the mower teeth, even on the Range Rover's front tire, which felt like the only honest thing that woman had touched all morning. I stood there after they pulled away, bees crawling over my sleeves because they knew me and I knew them, and I remember thinking Ruth would have been furious. Not loud furious. No, worse than that. Quiet furious. The kind where she would wash 1 coffee cup for 10 minutes and then ruin a man's whole week with 6 polite words. I went inside, washed my hands, set my phone on the table, and opened the old file cabinet in my office. The original Juniper Hills Plat was in the 3rd drawer, wrapped in a yellow sleeve, my seal pressed clean into the paper, every pin, bearing, and boundary exactly where I had left them 15 years before. I laid Marla's letter beside it. Then I laid Ruth's photo beside that, the one from Yellowstone where the wind had her hair in her face and she was laughing because I had dropped a sandwich into a creek. I looked at that picture for a long time. Then I called Leonard and said, "I think somebody forged my stamp." Leonard did not laugh this time. He only said, "Caleb, lock your doors, back up your phone, and get me every piece of paper they touched." Leonard Pike had known me long enough to understand that when I said somebody forged my stamp, I was not being dramatic, because surveyors are many things: stubborn, sun-damaged, bad at parties. But we do not throw that word around unless the ground under our feet has truly shifted. By 10 that morning, I was at the Plat County Records office with a folder under my arm and dried honey still on my cuffs, and Nadine Bell, the county recorder, took one look at me through the glass window and said, "Caleb, either somebody died or somebody lied." Nadine had worked that counter for 26 years and could remember deed books the way some people remember birthdays. She smelled faintly of peppermint gum and printer toner, and she had the habit of lowering her voice whenever paperwork started looking criminal, which it did about 7 minutes after she pulled the Juniper Hills file. The original Plat was there, of course, filed in 2009, stamped by me, license number 4176, every bearing clean, every boundary where it belonged. And then there were a few harmless amendments over the years: drainage easements, a cul-de-sac correction, one lot line adjustment because some man built a patio where he should not have. Nothing surprising. Then Nadine slid out a new packet dated February 18th of that year, and I felt the air leave the room before I even touched it. The amended community boundary claimed 38 acres of my south field had been incorrectly excluded from Juniper Hills since the beginning, which was a lie so lazy it almost offended me professionally. In the certification box was my name, or at least somebody's careful imitation of it. But the seal was wrong, the number was wrong, and the curve of the C in Caleb had been copied from an old scanned plat I recognized from a water district job 15 years earlier. Nadine watched me read it, then turned her monitor around and showed me the upload log, filed electronically at 5:43 p.m. by Ellis Rowe, Assistant Land Use Clerk, approved by Preston Kincaid, Board Liaison. I asked if she could print the full chain. Every upload, every timestamp, every approving note certified. She was already reaching for the stamp before I finished the sentence. "Caleb," she said softly, "I do not know what you are standing in, but it is deeper than mud." On the drive home, I called Leonard. And for once, he did not make a joke. He told me to file a public records request for every message involving Juniper Hills, Preston Kincaid, Marla Kincaid, Ellis Rowe, and any developer who had sniffed around that south corridor. I did it from my kitchen table with Buck asleep on my boots and Ruth's photo watching from the windowsill. And I remember thinking how strange grief is, because one week you are too tired to fold laundry, and the next week a woman in white jeans gives you something to fight. That afternoon, my insurance man, Wade Harlan, came out and photographed the bee yard. Wade was built like a feed sack and talked like every sentence had to pass through gravel. But when he saw the crushed hives, he took off his cap. "I am sorry, Caleb," he said, and I knew he meant more than bees. We walked the clover line, took pictures of the mower tracks, the tire impressions, the orange stake holes, the honey pooled in the dirt. I saved every frame to 2 hard drives and a cloud folder Ruth had set up years ago after she got tired of me losing passwords on scraps of paper. The next morning, the second hit came, because people like Marla never stop at one bad idea when 3 are available. A white utility truck rolled up to the south fence. Not the mower crew this time, but a vegetation company out of Cheyenne. 2 men in chemical vests with tanks in the bed and spray wands hooked over their shoulders. The driver held up a work order saying Juniper Hills had authorized herbicide treatment for invasive pasture growth inside the corrected boundary. Invasive pasture growth. That was what they called Ruth's sweet clover. I told them they were trespassing, and the older man looked embarrassed, which told me he was not the villain, just another working man trapped inside somebody else's lie. He showed me the chemical sheet. Glyphosate mixed with a broadleaf booster. Legal, if applied right. Ugly if the wind got playful. I pulled out my phone, checked the wind at 11 miles an hour out of the southwest, and said, "You spray 1 drop across that fence, and your boss is going to wish he sold cupcakes for a living." He nodded, then made a call, and I heard Marla's voice through the speaker. "Sharp enough to cut twine. Do the work you were hired to do," she said. "Mr. Mercer can file his little complaint afterward." Little complaint. I almost smiled. They sprayed along the fake flag line, and by dusk, the outer edge of Ruth's clover had started to curl. I took soil samples with GPS tags, bagged leaves, photographed wind direction, logged time, temperature, and drift pattern, because this was not my first fight with chemicals and wind, and because Leonard had once told me juries believe old men more when old men bring labels. That night, while I was labeling sample bags at the kitchen sink, my daughter Claire called from Laramie, trying to sound casual and failing. "Dad," she said, "why is there a post saying you threatened a mum with a shotgun near Juniper Hills?" I stood there with a pencil in my hand and dirt under my nails, and for a second I missed Ruth so hard it felt physical, because Ruth would have known exactly what to say to keep Claire from crying. I asked her where she saw it. "Private neighborhood group," she said. "Someone screenshotted it. They posted your mailbox, your truck. They are saying you are unstable since Mom died. There are kinds of cruelty that arrive wearing perfume, and Marla Kincaid had found one." I told Claire I had not threatened anyone, that I was home all afternoon, that the cameras would prove it. And then I sat down after we hung up and stared at the dark kitchen window until my own reflection looked like a stranger. The public records came 3 days later, 399 PDF, and I opened it at 9:15 p.m., thinking I would skim for an hour. I read until dawn. There were emails between Preston Kincaid and a development outfit called Prairie Crown Partners, men with soft hands and words like premium corridor expansion and underutilized legacy acreage. There was a map with my field shaded as Phase 3. There was a profit estimate showing 64 luxury lots at prices that made my teeth hurt. There were messages from Marla, not official emails, but screenshots Preston had saved like a fool, saying Caleb is old, alone, and sentimental. Apply pressure through nuisance enforcement. If he gets loud, we make him look dangerous. There was Ellis Rowe, the assistant clerk, complaining about money, and Preston replying that help was coming after the filing cleared. There was even a draft transfer agreement routing the land through a little holding company registered to Marla's sister in Nebraska. By the time the sun came up, I had the whole thing spread across the kitchen table in neat stacks. Forgery, motive, money, intimidation, chemical damage, defamation. Buck sat beside me with his chin on the chair, watching me like he knew the room had changed. I opened the safe in the hall, the one where Ruth kept her mother's wedding ring and the recipe cards she refused to digitize, and I put the original Plat, the certified forged Plat, the records packet, the photos, the soil samples receipt, and 3 backup drives inside. Then I called Leonard. He listened without interrupting, which for Leonard was basically a medical emergency. When I finished, he said, "Caleb, this is not an HOA dispute anymore. This is land fraud. It may be public corruption. It may be wire fraud. And if they used a forged survey seal across state banking or development documents, they have invited the federal government to supper." By noon, Leonard had a retired document examiner named June Halvorson coming from Casper, an independent surveyor named Roy Ansell setting control points along my south boundary, and a young reporter named Tessa Vale from the Briar Fork Ledger sitting at my table drinking coffee she was too polite to call terrible. Tessa had been chasing rumors about Prairie Crown for months, and when she saw Preston's emails, she stopped taking notes and just whispered, "Oh my God." I told her she could write it when Leonard said, "Not before," and she nodded like a person holding a lit match in a dry barn. 2 days later, Marla called 911. She claimed I had walked my fence with a rifle and pointed at a jogger. 2 deputies came to my porch just after 4, polite but careful, hands resting near their belts, and I cannot blame them, because a false report still arrives in a real patrol car. I asked what time the incident supposedly happened. They said 2:20. I invited them inside, showed them my kitchen camera, which had me making coffee at 2:17, then my barn camera, which had me carrying sample bags at 2:23, then the south pasture camera, which had no jogger, no rifle, and Marla's Range Rover creeping past the fence at 2031. The older deputy exhaled through his nose and said, "Mr. Mercer, may we keep copies of that footage?" I said, "Take 2. Sheriff Lyle Boone arrived 20 minutes later, and Lyle had known me since we were both young enough to think our knees would last forever. He watched the footage, read the record summary Leonard had emailed, and his face got still in that lawman way that means somebody just ran out of luck. "Caleb," he said, "I am going to preserve the dispatch audio, and I am going to advise Mrs. Kincaid not to make any more creative phone calls." I said, "Sheriff, I hope she ignores you." He looked at me for half a second, then almost smiled. That evening, Plat drove home and found me in the barn repairing hive boxes I knew the bees might never use. She stood in the doorway wearing Ruth's old denim jacket, and for a moment she looked so much like her mother that I had to turn back to the workbench. "Why did you not tell me all of it?" she asked. "Because you just buried your mom," I said, "and I did not want to hand you a war." She came over, picked up a broken frame and said, "Dad, she was my mom too." So I showed her everything: the forged seal, the emails, the fake 911 call, the developer's map, the clover samples. She cried, but not the helpless kind, the angry kind. Then she wiped her face and said, "Mom would have brought cookies to the hearing just to make them uncomfortable." I laughed for the first time in days. The hearing was set for the following Thursday, an emergency land use session to ratify the corrected Juniper Hills boundary. That was Preston's play. Quick vote, quick transfer, quick money, before anyone could untangle the paper trail. But Leonard filed the preservation notice with the county, the HOA Prairie Crown, and every board member named in the records. He sent a criminal referral to the Wyoming Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit, another packet to the FBI office in Cheyenne, and a cease and desist letter to Marla that was so politely vicious I read it twice for pleasure. On Thursday afternoon, I put on a clean shirt, tucked Ruth's old silver cross into my pocket, and drove toward the county building with Claire beside me and Buck asleep in the truck bed. I was not calm exactly. Calm is too clean a word. I was full of grief and anger and something colder than both. Marla Kincaid thought she was walking into a room where an old widower would beg to keep what was his. She did not know I was bringing the original map, the forged map, the records, the cameras, the wind logs, the chemical tests, and every quiet little truth she had mistaken for weakness. The county building in Briar Fork had the kind of hallway every small town knows by heart. Old tile, bulletin boards with curling flyers, a water fountain that hummed like it had secrets, and framed photographs of men who had spent their lives looking serious in bad suits. I had walked through that hallway 100 times over the years to file plats, answer questions, fix somebody else's bad measurements. But that Thursday evening felt different, like the building itself knew it was about to be asked what kind of county it wanted to be. The hearing room was already half full when Claire and I arrived. Ranchers sat beside subdivision homeowners, reporters lined the wall, and 3 deputies stood near the exit trying to look casual and failing. Marla Kincaid sat in the second row wearing a navy blazer and pearl earrings, her hair perfect, her mouth tight, like a woman who had rehearsed outrage in the mirror. Preston sat at the commissioner's table with a folder in front of him and a glass of water he kept touching but never drinking. Leonard Pike was waiting for us near the aisle, short, wrinkled, and calm in a way that made dangerous men nervous. He patted the chair beside him and said, "Caleb, try not to enjoy this too much." I said, "No promises." The chairman opened the meeting at 6:30, and Preston wasted no time. He talked about corrected boundaries, administrative cleanup, community standards, and the economic benefit of responsible development, using the kind of language people use when they want theft to sound like paperwork. He never looked at me, not once. When he finished, Marla stood and told the room that Juniper Hills had been patient with a difficult neighbor, that the board had tried kindness, that safety concerns had escalated, and that nobody wanted conflict, which was rich coming from a woman who had sent machines through my wife's clover and then called the police on a ghost with a rifle. A few people nodded because fear has muscle memory. Then Leonard stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Madam Chair," he said, "before this commission considers ratifying any boundary correction, my client requests 15 minutes to present evidence that the document before you is fraudulent." Preston shifted in his chair. Marla gave a little laugh, soft enough to pretend it was accidental. The chairwoman, Ruth Ann Daly, who had taught half the room 8th grade history 30 years earlier and still had the face of someone who could smell cheating through a closed notebook, looked over her glasses and said, 15 minutes granted." Leonard nodded to me. My legs felt older than they had that morning, but I got up, carried one plain cardboard box to the lectern, and set it down. I looked at the room, and for a moment all I saw was Ruth's empty chair at our kitchen table, her coffee mug still in the cabinet with the little chip on the rim. The way she used to tell me, "Caleb, facts are only boring until somebody needs them." "My name is Caleb Mercer," I said. "I surveyed the original Juniper Hills boundary in 2009. I set the pins. I signed the plat. I have lived north of that fence for 43 years, and my family has owned that pasture since my grandfather bought it with wheat money and a handshake nobody would trust today." Then I opened the box. Exhibit 1 was the original deed. Exhibit 2 was the 2009 plat, my stamp, my license number 4176. Exhibit 3 was the amended plat filed in February, with a forged version of my signature and a license number that had never belonged to me. I placed them side by side on the projector. Even from the back row you could see it. The fake stamp was too dark, the signature too smooth, the numbers wrong. I heard somebody whisper, "Oh my lord," I continued. Exhibit 4. Certified county upload log showing the amended plat was filed after business hours by Ellis Rowe and approved by Commissioner Preston Kincaid. Exhibit 5. Independent survey results from Roy Ansell confirming the boundary has not moved, not by a foot, not by an inch since 2009. Exhibit 6. Photographs and video of Juniper Hills contractors destroying my bee-yard under orders from Mrs. Kincaid. I clicked the remote, and there she was on the screen, sunglasses on, tablet in hand, saying, "Keep moving." Marla's face changed. Just a little, not fear yet, but the first cousin of it. Exhibit 7. Chemical drift samples taken from my late wife's clover patch, with wind logs and lab confirmation. Exhibit 8. Security footage proving the 911 report about me brandishing a rifle was false. Sheriff Boone moved slightly at that, not toward Marla exactly, but enough that she noticed. Then I paused, because some moments deserve a little room to breathe. Exhibit 9, I said, is a public records response containing emails between Commissioner Kincaid, Marla Kincaid, Ellis Rowe, and Prairie Crown Partners. I will not read all of it. Nobody here wants to sit through 389 pages unless the coffee improves. A few people laughed, and that laugh broke something open in the room. I read 3 lines. Phase 3 acquisition dependent on corrected Mercer boundary. Apply nuisance pressure. If he gets loud, we make him look dangerous. The room went quiet in a way I had never heard from people sitting so close together. Leonard stepped beside me and said, "These records have been forwarded to the Wyoming Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit and the FBI Field Office in Cheyenne. A preservation notice has been served. Any deletion, alteration, or concealment of records after service may constitute obstruction." Preston finally looked at me. He looked smaller than I expected. Marla stood so fast her chair scraped backward. "This is harassment," she snapped. "This man has been unstable since his wife died. That did it." I had stayed calm through the mower, the spray, the lies, even Claire crying on the phone. But hearing Ruth dragged into that room like evidence of weakness made the world narrow for one hot second. I leaned into the microphone and said, "Mrs. Kincaid, my wife being dead does not make your map real." Nobody laughed that time. They just stared at her. Sheriff Boone walked to the front with 2 deputies behind him. Preston started saying he wanted counsel. The sheriff said, "You can ask for counsel after you stand up." Preston did not stand right away, so one deputy helped him. The charges read in that room sounded unreal and perfectly natural at the same time. Forgery of a public record, conspiracy to commit fraud, abuse of public office, attempted theft by deception, and filing false instruments related to land transfer. Marla backed toward the aisle, still talking, still saying everyone would regret this, still trying to turn volume into authority. But the second deputy met her halfway and asked her to step outside for questioning regarding a false emergency report. Her pearls shook when she pointed at me. "You think you won?" she said. I looked at the projector, at the real Plat beside the fake one, at Ruth's Clover glowing pale in the photograph, at Claire standing in the back with tears on her face and her jaw set like her mother's, and I said, "No, Marla, I think the boundary held." That line made the paper the next morning. Tessa Vale's story hit before sunrise, and by lunch every diner booth in 3 counties had an opinion. Preston resigned 2 days later. Ellis Rowe took a deal and admitted he had uploaded the forged Plat for $10,000 and the promise of a job with Prairie Crown. Prairie Crown denied everything until Leonard produced the transfer draft. Then they discovered a sudden interest in settlement. Marla was removed from the HOA board by a vote so lopsided it almost felt rude, and the Range Rover disappeared from Juniper Hills before the first snow. Preston eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges, served time, lost his seat, lost his license to handle public land matters, and, from what I heard, lost the respect of people who had spent years pretending not to see what he was. The settlement paid for the hives, the clover damage, the legal bills, and more money than Ruth and I ever would have known what to do with. So I used part of it to put a conservation easement on the south pasture. We named it Ruth's Clover Meadow. There is a little gravel path now, open to anyone from sunrise to sunset, with a bench under the cottonwoods and a small bronze plaque that says, "For Ruth, who believed land remembers kindness." The bees came back the next spring. Not all at once. Nothing good returns all at once. But one warm May afternoon I saw them working the clover again, slow and stubborn, and Buck, who had gotten grey around the muzzle by then, lay beside the fence like he was supervising a miracle. Claire visits more now. Sometimes we sit on that bench and say nothing, which is one of the few kinds of conversation grief does not ruin. People ask me if I hate Marla. I tell them hate takes more energy than she deserves. What I hate is how easy it is for small power to become cruelty when nobody checks the paperwork. I hate how a community can be scared into nodding along. I hate how many decent people saw the blue map, heard the scary rumor, and chose the comfortable lie because it came from someone with a title. So here is where I want to leave you. Was I right to let them keep digging their own hole, even after the first hive was destroyed? Should I have stopped the mower, dragged Marla into court immediately, and saved Ruth's clover from the worst of it? Or was patience the only reason the whole scheme came down? Because justice can look noble after the fact, but in the middle of it, it feels a lot like standing still while somebody swings at what you love. Tell me what you would have done. Would you have fought loud, fought dirty, or fought with records? And if you have ever dealt with an HOA, a crooked board, a greedy neighbor, or anyone who used a clipboard like a weapon, put your story in the comments. Somebody watching may need to hear it before their own boundary gets crossed. And if this story made you believe quiet people are not always easy targets, hit subscribe. Because next time I am telling you about a retired fire captain, a flagpole, and the HOA president who learned the hard way that some men do not lower the flag just because a committee says so.